According to a 2021 McKinsey Study, companies with diverse boards and executive leadership earn more in profits. Specifically, companies in the top 25 in gender diversity were on pace to out-earn those in the bottom 25% when it came to gender diversity by almost that same margin of 25%. Victoria Pelletier is a 20-year corporate executive and board director. She is currently the managing director of Accenture. She's earned the nickname of the turnaround queen from her former colleagues and employers. She spends her days inspiring her team and empowers them and her clients to change their mindset surrounding business, leadership, and culture. She has little time for accepting the status quo as the norm, and she's always ready to take on a new challenge. Case in point, she became one of the youngest chief operating officers at 24, a president by 35, and a CEO by the time she celebrated her 41st birthday. Victoria is also a staunch advocate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. She believes that an inclusive culture is a competitive advantage that more companies ought to take advantage of. And she joined me this week to have a conversation about success in business, diversifying a workforce, and how important representation is in positions of leadership. I'm ready to have a consequential conversation of progress at Pelletier. Join me this week to do just that. So without further delay, I'm Kevin McShane. Let's have this conversation. Victoria, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program, and I'm super excited to learn all about your journey in corporate America and your passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Great to see you this afternoon, and thank you so very much for a few minutes.
Thanks. Happy to be here, Kevin.
Absolutely. Now, Victoria, I know that you've spent more than 2 decades in corporate leadership. So I'm fascinated to ask you, how do you define effective corporate leadership where you can have your employees excited to come to work?
Well, I think it's multi-pronged. I wish I could tell you that there was a silver bullet. One thing that I would say in terms of how to be an effective leader, I think it's a combination of many things, and that includes being at our heart truly, human-centered in how we lead our team, and that means, showing up with humility. Showing up with care and compassion for our colleagues and our employees. It also means things like, authenticity and being really comfortable demonstrating that we're creating an environment where everyone feels like they can belong, but by ourselves being really authentic, sharing our own stories where we're comfortable. And then also from a communication standpoint, beyond being authentic, being as transparent as we can be, to the extent we can be as leaders, to help people feel like they're a part of the process and decision making, but they have understanding of what's happening around and to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Victoria, picking up on your last point of being authentic, what do you think it means to be genuinely authentic, where people really can sort of view their leaders as a magnetic force in which they want to follow? Because, there's a difference between being genuinely authentic and having it come across as being forced. So tell me, where do you think the difference lies in being genuinely authentic?
Well, I actually see it maybe potentially not just being it coming across as being fake or false, but rather people who use authenticity as their excuse for being horrible in terms of what they communicate. There's a book called Radical Candor by a woman named Kim Scott, and she defines being radically candid, so being direct and open and giving the tough feedback from a place of, again, care and compassion and wanting someone to do well. What I think some leaders do in trying to be authentic is be brutally honest from not always a good place. So for me, being authentic means many things. It means I'm going to share my own journey and my story, and where I've stumbled. I am far from perfect, and what mistakes I've made, and what have I learned from them. So if I'm going to coach and guide other people, then I'm going to tell them what I learned in the past. So that's being authentic. It also means putting my hand up to say, I don't know what I don't know, and I need help. And it also means being vulnerable in business. And that was a mistake I made, early in my career, because I became an executive at a young age. I had a bit of imposter syndrome, and I felt I needed to show up all business all the time. And so I didn't show that I had these deep emotions. I'm a highly emotional being, and that I could be vulnerable. And that didn't mean I was any less of a leader or, with greater or less ability to deliver in the workplace. So that's what I'd say when it comes to authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was going to ask you for my next question whether you thought there was power in being vulnerable, and you sort of answered it in your last answer, but I'll give you the space to expand, if you wish, on the power of vulnerability in business and how important that is as a leader.
So I think it's exceptionally important for a number of different reasons. So one, that human-centered leadership comes with, again, that care and compassion, and so there's a need to be vulnerable to demonstrate that effectively. The other reason would be that it builds trust with our teams, and it ultimately, people do business with people they like and trust, and therefore they want to do business with. And that's certainly from a consumer who purchases from businesses, but also from employees who choose to remain in organizations, who feel highly engaged in the workplace, and therefore they're generally more productive. So not only do I think it's being vulnerable to build trust is the right thing to do for our colleagues and our businesses. Quite frankly, it's actually drives solid business results by doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of the things that also drives business results, Victoria, and I don't have to tell you, is embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that that I was born with cerebral palsy, and part of my background is helping businesses sort of amplify the hiring of folks with disabilities. So when you look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace, what do you think of in terms of fostering an environment where individuals with disabilities can thrive, and also building an inclusive environment overall? What do you think of when you think of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, so it is a passion of mine, and something I've been advocating for and extremely vocal about for probably the last 20 years. And it comes as a result of my own lived experience, although I acknowledge the great privilege I have being born in North America as a able-bodied white woman. But I am used to being the only woman. I am part of the LGBT community. And so I felt it started with my own sense of onlyness and loneliness as a result between age, gender, sexuality. And so my advocacy came as a result of my own lived experience. And then what I've realized is, so first of all, there's a multitude of ways for us to be looking at diversity. And as you said, that can be persons with different types of abilities, whether that's physically, whether it's neurodiversity, it is gender, it's race, it's religion, it's all of these pieces. And also there's intersectionality from that. You as a Black man has, with a disability means the intersectionality of those elements, plus others I might not be aware of or see. And so I think it's critically important for not just in business, in our communities, period, to recognize the experience we all have in the diversity, some of which people won't be able to see physically. And that goes back to authenticity on vulnerability. It's part of why I think we need to be open about sharing our stories. And then the next thing is around when we think about it from a workplace, again, much like, vulnerability, breeding and building trust, being the right thing to do, but drives business results, so too does DE&I. Again, it creates it when done well. And I say that because I think there's a lot of focus on bringing in diverse talent without, and in this case, for persons with disabilities, how do we make the right kind of accommodations to support those individuals so they can be effective and perform in their roles and also feel like they belong? And so not just accommodations, but how do we just create a sense of community where people feel that they can show up and ultimately feel, and so that inclusive piece of DE&I, or now a lot of companies are talking about the B in that sense of belonging. So again, it's shown that it drives strong employee engagement, retention of employees, productivity. There's actually also studies that show it creates better innovation, as well as people are collaborating and working together when they feel a sense of belonging. So again, it's something I've long since been advocating for, and it's a big part of my quote unquote day job now, not just in terms of the work I get paid for, but the public speaking is to be talking about how do we do this and do this much more effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that point, when you hire folks with disabilities, you create a competitive advantage over your competition, don't you?
Oh, 100%. What I've seen working in a number of different, companies is those that have the most diverse talent, again, have, better engagement results. I am proud to say that at most of the organizations I've worked at, and I'll name one, which was at IBM, I actually had the most diverse team across the Americas, if not the globe, and could see some incredible business results from my team in terms of how they delivered for clients, but also in their own reported sort of engagement scores of how they felt in those situations. So definitely a clear advantage within an organization. And as you said, with our competitors, to have diverse talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Victoria, one of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast and one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because when I look at the world today, there are so many factions of life that want to bring us further apart from the center of sort of the unified center of making progress. So how do you think we can build more bridges of unity that bring us closer together as a business and a public society?
Well, I think there's a lot of people are talking about purpose, and I don't, and that's in our lives, period. I think in particular, the last couple of years have caused a lot of people, most people, I'd have to say, to reflect on, what means most to them and the choices that they're making that align to their purpose, their values, or mission. And so I think from a business perspective, it's getting really crystal clear on the purpose that the organization has, and not just a nice, pretty, statement on the wall, but how do you connect that down to the individual impact we all have in contributing towards the organization's purpose and mission? And that's a role of a leader, is to help articulate that and bring that down so everyone has a sense of it. And then making sure that we've got people, delivering against the impact that they personally want to have in that, and also helping create the future for them as well. And so I look at, I was a young mother, so I'm now almost an empty nester with my kids being 18 and 22, and particularly the older one, that sort of Gen Z population, what they look at in terms of thriving in the workplace and job security, although we know that doesn't really exist, is the investment in one's development. Am I, helping to make them relevant for the future? And so looking at skills. And so there's this role of purpose and impact and connecting it all the way through the hearts, the minds, and then, physical, when I say hands on keyboards, the work that people do every day. So that's what I think we need to be looking at. You can call it the future of work. Reality is the future is here right now. So we just need to be thinking very differently around, how to operate in business and in our communities, as you said, for the better good.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Victoria, for you personally, you're not someone who subscribes to the status quo, and you're really focused on becoming the best version of yourself. And I know that you were one of the youngest chief operating officers by the age of 24. You were a president by 35 and a CEO by 41. So tell me about your rise and what you've learned about yourself, both personally and professionally as well.
Well, what I learned was I needed to follow my passion, which is career advice I give, or career and life advice, quite frankly, including to my own children. When, my younger one was, 13 or 14 and asked, what they should do with the rest of their life, my advice was to follow your passion. And that was what I chose to do. So my plan was to be a lawyer. But while I was in university, I worked for a bank in their contact center and got promoted very, very quickly. Within 6 months, I was in a leadership role. And I learned when I was giving thought to undergrad, moving to my to go to law school, that I loved the business world. I was given an opportunity to move cross country and take an even more senior role. And so what I thought was going to be a year off before I went to went to law school, ended up being a career in the business world. I loved the business world. I loved leading people. And so then I let the path take me from there. And within 4 or 5 years of me making that decision, I was recruited away from the banking and the bank that I worked for to go and be the chief operating officer for a large outsourcing organization. It was a massive stretch role for me, but they hired me because of my banking experience. I'd been leading contact centers, which was primarily what the BPO work was. And they had great trust in me to be able to lean into not only the skills I had, but the ability to build teams around me that would complement the skills and experience I was missing. And from there, I've just continued down that path. I would attribute my career success to the fact that I did take risk like that one. I leaned into the things that made me really uncomfortable and, upskilled myself. So being really focused on my performance. So not only strong work ethic, but continuing to develop my own skills to make myself relevant for future. I've also worked really hard at building a strong personal brand and network around me, such that I've been given additional opportunities to progress through my career. And then I've also made some missteps. I mentioned earlier that I didn't always show up with the vulnerability that was needed. The business mask was on all the time. That, garnered me a nickname as the Iron Maiden. So I had to shift. I had to do things differently. I had to be comfortable showing up much more authentically, being more vulnerable, which made me uncomfortable. My early years, childhood, were quite rough. And so I feared rejection. And so again, I leaned into the things that made me uncomfortable. And I'd also say that I've gotten very good at creating boundaries, limitless ones. So no one's going to tell me how far I can or cannot go. But then also learning to say no to things that don't bring me personal or professional joy or value. And where I can't say no, I learned how to outsource or to delegate. So those would kind of be some of the tips I'd say through my career thus far I've learned.
Yeah, something I'm getting better at is delegating. And so I'll also share this with you, Victoria. I used to work for the YMCA as their lead job developer. And so I worked in the basement of the YMCA. That was where the employment department was. And my desk and my boss's desk was directly across from each other. So one thing which will always stick with me is my boss told me once, you can also close your computer after 5 o'clock and really recharge. And she really worked with me to tell me that as soon as an email comes into my inbox, I don't necessarily have to answer it. So I'm curious, as a successful businesswoman, how do you balance the need to get ahead versus the need to find your own personal sort of inner center as well?
Well, I think you need to be incredibly self-reflective around what does center you. So for me, that's things like I'm a big workout, like fitness fanatic. So I work out 6 days a week. So I've learned to block my calendar early in the morning so no one's booking me for a call, because I work out first thing in the morning and then I want to have a shower and be ready before I sit at my desk and start answering emails. So that's some of the discipline I've created and rigor in just my calendar to make sure that I can do the thing that centers me. The other thing would be that whole notion of prioritizing what's, urgent versus important, and tackling those things. And then again, as I said earlier, being okay with saying no to things. At one point I took on more and more and more. I sat on multiple boards, with, young children and being involved in their sports and parenting and alone, and all of those things. I actually at some point needed to recognize, is it going to advance me personally, my family, my career, making some of those decisions, and say no to it, or just finding alternative ways to do it. I've also gotten there's mixed feedback on multitasking and whether it's good or not. It's helped me. I'm getting worse at it as I get older. But when I was younger, I was exceptionally good at multitasking, and I was able to kind of bang out things exceptionally, quickly and maximize the most of my time so I could do as much as possible within the hours a day I was awake.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Victoria, I wanted to also ask you about groundbreakers, because what you may not know about me is I went to school to be a journalist originally, a sports reporter, but I always loved, on my LinkedIn profile, it says that journalism is like oxygen to me. I love telling stories, and one of the people that I looked up to in the journalism industry was Barbara Walters, and she was sort of a groundbreaker in her own right. And, with her passing last week, it really got me thinking about the concept of groundbreaking women and the inroads that they've made in terms of equality in the workplace. And I know I asked you earlier about equality and diversity and equity for folks with disabilities, but I also wanted to ask you the same question about women and how you think women still need to strive for the equality in the workplace that they so richly deserve. So how do you think we've made progress on women's equality in the workplace, and where do you think we still need to go?
So I think this is a topic near and dear to my heart. We have made progress. When I looked at, I'm a big fan of RBG, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So, her passing, hit me hard. She's who I dressed up as for Halloween this year. And so it's great to see several women on the Supreme Court now. I was so happy to see Judge Ketanji Brown, for example. So I think there's great shining examples. And we've made great progress in North America when considering the rest of the world. But the reality is, when you look, the World Economic Forum did their updated report late last year, and shows that we still have 60 years in North America to gain equity. And particularly pay equity from a gender perspective. Now, it's 120 years plus in other parts of the world. So again, there's privilege to living in North America, but we have to do more. When you look at venture capital funding, 4% or less go to women founders, less than 1% to people of color. So, for me, we have to do better. We've made progress, no doubt about it, but we're still very far from where we need to be. Look at the number of female CEOs in the Fortune 500, and it's scary. I love that I work for Accenture, and we have one of those women, is Julie Sweet, is the CEO of Accenture globally, and that's fantastic. But we have to do more. But I also don't lay that fully on the doorsteps of the boards and those that are in recruitment. It's on us as women as well to advocate for ourselves, to demand equity, and to feel comfortable in sharing responsibility with the partners, if we choose to have partners at home to help us with family duties as well, to enable us to move forward. So I think there's joint responsibility in the community and businesses at large, but also women to advocate for themselves and support other women in pulling them up as we rise.
Yeah, absolutely. And Victoria, I know that you were also recognized last year as one of the top 30 most influential business leaders in tech. So congratulations there. And I also know that banks have also recognized you as a top business leader. So tell me about all of these honors that you've received and what they mean to you as a whole, and how you're using them to propel yourself forward to make an even bigger difference.
Thank you for acknowledging the recognition I've received. It means a lot to me, because it means that there's recognition for the work that I've done. I choose to do it because I believe it's the right thing to do. I feel good doing the work, from whether it's from a DE&I perspective and advocacy. I am maniacally focused on being the right kind of leader that I would want to work for, and building the right kind of culture. So I do all of that just because that's who I am. So to receive recognition for it, means a lot. Although I will tell you, some of the recognition that I've received at an individual level, the men and women who've told me that I've helped them in their career, that actually means much more in many ways. But I do use the recognition to propel me forward in a few different ways. So as I, work with CEOs and boards, the corporate clients that I support as part of my day job, when they Google me or do a quick validation of what kind of requisite skills do I have to come in and be their advisor or bring a team to do that, it helps significantly. My plan is to go back to being the C-suite executive at one of our clients versus just being in a professional services setting. So it will help be a launch pad for that. And my side hustle that I do have approved by work has been as a professional public speaker. So getting recognition for the work that I do is not, proves that I'm not just talking the talk, I'm walking the walk, given that a lot of what I do from a public speaking perspective is talking about leadership, about culture, about DE&I, and more.
Yeah, congratulations on that, because I believe that the work that you're doing is truly impactful, and thank you for your tremendous passion in that area. And I'm also a motivational speaker, and at the end of my sort of professional speaking bio, it says that challenging others to reach their fullest potential is my greatest thrill as a motivational speaker, because I believe that paying it forward is important. So tell me, when you talk to people, how do you sort of challenge them to be 1% better than they were the day before?
The notion of and the phrase that I shared around being radically candid is one of the ways that I choose to do that. And so that means I will have the tough conversation or say things to people that maybe they've never heard before, to challenge them, to create awareness if they're not. I'm someone who's deeply self-reflective, to help me be better. And so I try and do that with the people that I engage with. I'll challenge them deeply, again, from a place of care, and to help them, be better. And so for anyone who chooses, I take very few executive coaching clients on, but when I do, that's a big part of the conversation with them, is how we're going to work together. And I'm going to challenge you greatly to look deeply at yourself, and sometimes share some things with you that maybe you don't want to hear, but you do need to hear to help propel and move you forward.
Absolutely. And, Victoria, one of the reasons I was so excited to talk to you this afternoon is because I wanted your perspective on women really asserting their value and knowing their value. Because I think in today's society specifically, it's important for women to know their value and fight for what they believe in from a principled perspective. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think that's a challenge for many women, is knowing their worth, what the market, is paying, if we're going to talk about compensation, and then being comfortable asking for it. I have this saying, you don't ask, you don't get. Sadly, my children have that one mastered almost now. But I think that's exceptionally important. And so, we are all, the CEOs of ourselves, our own career, of our brands. And it's important to understand what our worth is, what our value is, and to demand more.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you brought up earlier about being part of the LGBTQ community, and a couple of weeks ago, the Equality for Marriage Act was finally signed into law. So tell me, how do you think making progress on that front will really move the needle of progress forward as well?
Well, I'm fortunate to be born in Canada, although I'm a U.S. resident, and I'm proud to say that Canada was years and years ahead of this. So I was able to marry my ex-wife in 2004 when it first became legal there, and we had 2 children together, and she was named, even though I gave birth, on each of their birth certificates. So I will say I'm proud of that. I've had moments of, absolute panic, as I've lived in and out of the US actually for most of my adult life, but here the last number of years. And I have my younger one was born a daughter, soon to transition to male. And so it means a lot to me to ensure that there's rights for those in the community. And so I was happy to see there's been so many steps back here in the US on a lot of progress related to human rights and equality. So for me, I was exceptionally happy to see that. It's just another step forward for the DE&I much more broadly. Again, talked about, equal rights, period. And in this case, to love whomever you're going to love. I've told both my children, one or both of you is going to make me a grandmother at some point, but not for a long time. I don't care how that happens. I don't care who your partners are. But I'm happy that it passed. And certainly, hopeful for the future for all of those in the queer community.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you brought it up, Victoria, I am also Canadian. So I live in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, which is the city right across the river from Detroit. And, I think it's important to celebrate my Canadian heritage whenever I can. My dad is also American, so I get Turkey Day twice a year. I never complain about it, okay? But I want to know, what for you is the best part about being Canadian?
The inclusiveness of the country, quite frankly. I I mean, there's parts of it. So I grew up in Western Canada, in Calgary, which has changed dramatically over the years. And I remember when I first got relocated to Toronto, one of the things I loved the most was the diversity that was there. So, it's not necessarily that diversity is not the same across the country, but for the most part, that sense of inclusion and strong sense of community is what I love about being Canadian. I'll tell you, when I travel around the world, I usually lead with the fact that I'm Canadian, but a US resident, because I'm proud of the reputation we have as being kind, being caring community that opens their arms to all. That makes me exceptionally proud.
Yeah, absolutely. And Victoria, I'm also curious to ask you about what's the greatest part about living life, and what do you think is the greatest lesson that you've learned in both your business and personal life as well?
I use the word joy a lot. So, I've learned a lot to, I have an 80-20 rule around, like, I choose not to do things that, and whether it's work, that, at least 80% of the time I need to get up and look forward to going into work that day. There's going to be 20% of administrative tasks or things I'm not going to enjoy, or maybe the occasional human that I work with who's not so nice sometimes, but 80% of the time. And that's how I kind of approach life. And I talked about not doing things that don't bring me joy personally or professionally. And, that amplified, my ex-wife, actually, although we were divorced at the time, she passed away from cancer a few years after we had separated. And so my children lost a parent, and that just caused this moment for me. I think I felt I had something to prove given my early years, and, and I'd progressed in business. And I think, the money that came along with that and the stuff, just, it all fell away at that point. Like, that's not what's important. Family and health and joy are. And so that is, for me, my focus in life and where I spend my time. Although I'll donate everything possible to science, when I die, so there's not going to be a tombstone, but if there was, it's not going to talk about the business results, that I delivered. I want the legacy I have to be around the impact and the people that I've touched. So that's how I choose to live my life. In the second question, or like, what have I learned in, business? For me, I really focused on doing the right thing. And it doesn't mean I am not exceptionally successful at driving business results, but that's from a place of find the problem or a challenge to solve in working with clients and their customers or employees, whomever we're working with, but ultimately doing the right thing. And so that's been a struggle sometimes, working for these large global organizations that are focused on quarter to quarter results, where there's a trade-off sometimes for the short-term results, where I'm focused on the long term. Simon Sinek's I'm a big fan of his and his infinite game, right? Like, you don't win at life. You don't, win at business. You can win contracts. There's things you do, but looking at it as life and business as being this infinite game that we're in. That's how I approach my life. That's how I approach business. And that's how I approach who I am as an individual, and in business as well, who I am as the partner to clients and as a leader and colleague to my fellow employees.
Yeah, absolutely. And, my final question for all of my podcasts is always about legacy, and you answered it in your last answer. So I'll rephrase it this way. What do you think it takes to build a successful legacy? And how do you think you'll imprint those building blocks on your own legacy as well?
I think legacy can mean different things to different people. And for some, knowing that you have touched the lives of a few, improved community, people, etc., that's enough for many. For some, they're they want it to be much bigger and bolder and it to be in bright lights. And that can be, if you're fortunate enough to have money to, donate and build a cancer wing at a hospital or those sorts of things. And so I think it means different things for different people. For me, at the end of the day, I want, as I said earlier, those individuals that I've engaged with to feel like I left a mark. I care deeply about them and their, personal journeys and them as individuals, and that I did something to better our communities, our businesses, and society as a whole. Those are things for me that will be included in when I talk about the legacy I want to leave. Hopefully I've done that on enough stages and with enough people that there might be some recognition for it, but that's not why I do it on a daily basis.
Yeah, life is all about paying it forward and making a difference, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And Victoria, quickly tell me, if people want to get connected with you, what's the best way they can do that?
I have my own website, which is where you'll find all the articles and content I write, a lot of samples of the media and speaking I do, which is victoria-pelletier.com.
Fantastic. Well, I certainly enjoyed engaging in conversation with you, and I want to thank you for the good work that you do to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion in business life and society and everything in between. It was delightful to engage in conversation with you this afternoon, and I want to thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kevin. It was great.